Hi, I'm Doug Garsky, Event Management Lecturer at the Blue Mountains International Hotel Management School here at Town Hall. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of this land, and we acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of this place we now call Sydney. I'd also like to acknowledge and celebrate International Women's Day. Welcome to the March Leadership Speaker Series. Our guest today, Peter Tudehope, is an award-winning General Manager of the Radisson Blu Plaza, Sydney, and he's celebrating over 10 years with that hotel. Peter's also Regional Manager Australia Pacific of the Radisson Hotel Group Asia Pacific, and he's had an extensive background in hotels. He was Director of Operations and Services for the Radisson Hotel Group Asia Pacific. He's also the Chairman of the Accommodation Board for Tourism Accommodation Australia for New South Wales, and his career has seen him receive many accolades, and I'll just go through these. The Australasian Hotelier of the Year Award at the HM Awards in Sydney in September 2014, the Esprit General Manager of the Year Award in 2009, the TripAdvisor Award of Excellence 2013 and 14, the TAA Awards for Outstanding Community Service and Achievement, the AHA Redeveloped Hotel of the Year in 2011, the Carlson Hotel of the Year Asia Pacific in 2010, and the TripAdvisor Traveller's Choice Award 2008, and World Travel Awards Australia's leading business hotel in 2008. Hosting today is our own Program Director, Dr. Simon Pawson. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Doug. Peter, welcome to campus and welcome to the Leadership Speaker Series. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today, and for me, particularly meaningful because what our audience perhaps doesn't know is we were together at the Regent Hotel back in the early 90s, and we have both worked for Radisson Hotels, to which you're still with Radisson Hotels. So to speak to you all these years later about what's happened and the industry in general, again, it's a pleasure for me to do so. So welcome. And I suppose really the first place to start for you to share with our students is to tell us a little bit about where your passion for the hospitality industry came from.
Yeah, good question, Simon. I sort of left school before all of you were born, I'd suggest, but I didn't quite know what to do when I left school, and my father at the time said to me, well, why don't you go into hospitality? And back then, there weren't wonderful institutions like the Blue Mountain Hotel School. The best you could do was go to TAFE, and the only TAFE that had hospitality was at East Sydney Tech, which is up at Darlinghurst, the old jail, and there used to be an arts students there and the catering students, and I remember going for an interview there with the head of the school, and he asked me why did I want to work in hospitality, and I said I don't really know, and he said, well, you can't start this course until you go and do 12 months in the industry because we're not convinced you're going to stick to it. So that's what I did. I went off and did 12 months, and I went out to Blacktown and worked at the Blacktown Inn Hotel, and I learnt to pull beers and I learnt to stem a keg, and I thought this is really what I want to do. This is where the passion actually started, was working in the public bar at the Blacktown Inn Hotel back in 19...
Is it still there?
No, it's not. It's not. But that's where it started. So it was a great journey from there, and obviously from there I moved into perhaps the accommodation side of the business rather than the pub side of the business.
So really your first foray into hospitality was in food and beverage?
Yeah, it was, in actual fact, yeah, when you look at it that way.
Yeah. How important do you think it is for a hotel leader to really understand the nuts and bolts, the workings of a hotel? So, in other words, to be able to work behind the bar, to be able to make a bed, to understand how breakfast service works, to be able to clear a buffet or to carry plates and so on. Do you think that is a fundamental trait for a hotel leader to actually have?
I do, Simon, I really do. I cast my mind back to when I was a front office manager back at the Intercontinental Hotel, which opened in 1985, and I was part of the opening team there. And they wanted me to take on a rooms division role, so they sent me across to Washington to work in the Willard Hotel in Washington as a room attendant. And I had no idea what a room attendant really did. I knew they were downstairs coordinating the rooms that we had to sell upstairs, and I thought, you know, this can't be too hard. So I went off and did this, and for 2 weeks they put me with somebody and I worked with them cleaning the rooms, and I thought, this is all pretty easy. You know, just a bit of dusting here, a bit of tidying up there. It was pretty straightforward. Then after 2 weeks they asked me to clean 13 rooms on my own. Well, I got through the first day, I'd completed 6 and I could hardly move. I was so exhausted. So it took me about 6 weeks to be able to clean 13 rooms, but do I understand what is needed in housekeeping? Do I understand what they go through day to day? Absolutely, because I've done it myself. And it's very hard if you haven't got some knowledge to ever lead in an area where people are experts, because they soon pick up on the fact that you really don't know what you're talking about. And once they establish that, then your leadership is compromised every time.
I would perhaps argue that every single student sitting in this room today and everybody in YouTube land, that's our students watching from other locations, in their minds at the moment, they're thinking about their next 5 years and perhaps what they need to do to get promoted, to move up to the next position within the industry. Tell us about your early days in the industry. What did you learn about how to get ahead, how to get promoted?
Yeah, I always think careers need a lot of luck, to be honest with you. You've got to be in the right place at the right time, and then you've got to have the aptitude and the skill as well to be able to do that. So, and you often see people, and I'm sure as you go through your career, you see people ahead of you and you think, how did they ever get there? And you think, you know, because they really don't seem to know what they're doing. But it's being in the right place at the right time sometimes has led that to be the case. But for me, in my career, I always thought, you know, you've got to be diligent about what you do. You've got to be well informed, and you've got to work hard, I guess, is the end of the game. It's not just going to be given to you. You just don't turn up and think, well, the expectation is, well, I've been doing this now, it's my turn. People are looking for that person that's got passion. And if you've got passion in what you're doing, that's the cream that comes to the top. And that's what leaders and managers are looking for, is that passion they see in people about how they go about their day-to-day.
And I suppose it's very important from that very first contact with the hotel when you go for that first interview, or if you're going for an interview for promotion, to really ensure that you're demonstrating that love, that passion for what you're actually doing and the industry itself.
Absolutely right, Simon. And one of the things we have students obviously that work for us. We've had a couple from here actually work for us as well. But one of the things I always say to the students that come to work for us is every single situation you're in is a learning situation. And I even recommend to them that they should have a diary where they go home every day and write the one thing they learnt that was a positive thing and the one thing they learnt that wasn't so positive. Because when they become managers and leaders, they're going to reflect on how they felt when they were in those roles, working their way through their careers. And it's such an important and sort of motivating way to look at, you know, no matter what situation is, I'm learning today, you know, and that's really the truth of it. And if you take that mindset into your role, you move forward very quickly because people are seeing you want to absorb more and more. And people like seeing people that are eager to learn. They really are.
We were both at the Regent Sydney in the early 1990s before the brand changed to the Four Seasons. Back in the 1990s, the Regent was considered as a world-renowned hotel and certainly had the reputation. I personally remember most staff had T-shirts that said on them, "I'm Regent trained," or there was another T-shirt that had a whole host of celebrities' names that stayed at the Regent, and then underneath, "and me." In other words, I've stayed there also. So certainly the hotel was exceedingly globally well known. What do you think, or what do you believe, was the secret to their success? What made the Regent such an outstanding property back in the early 1990s?
They were the first, basically the first real five-star hotel to hit Sydney. Before then we had the Hilton, the Wentworth Hotel and the Boulevard. They were the three big hotels in the marketplace. And then in 1981 the Regent came along. And it came along at a completely different level in what service and standards were being offered at the other three major hotels that were in the city at that time. So for them being the first, and it's like any product that's first, your reputation is enhanced. It had such a wow factor about it when it first arrived into the marketplace, and it had a lot of international department heads from a lot of experience, and they brought all their international flavour into our business. And back in those days, hotels were where all the A-listers wanted to be seen. That was, you know, the general manager was a very important person in those days in the community, and obviously the first person invited to lots of events, and a lot of the big events that were held at the time were held at the hotel. So, you know, the black and white balls and all those things that were important back in the 80s gave it a reputation, and it just gained on that reputation and strength. And of course, when any celebrity visited, the only place they could put them back then really was the Regent. So that's how it all started, and it obviously grew from there.
And I also seem to recall, I mean, you were very much attached to front office, and I was very much attached to food and beverage, and then housekeeping, first as a floor steward and a butler, and then as the housekeeping coordinator. But one thing all these years that have stayed in my mind was that focus. It didn't matter where you were in the hotel, but that focus to attention to detail. There was not literally anything that was overlooked, especially in relation to if there was an important guest coming and so on. The whole hotel went through a full inspection, but the importance was, and you know, as I said, it stayed, I think, with me all these years, attention to detail, and they were very good at doing that. So.
Yeah, and definitely in the luxury market, in the five-star market, I have a saying that people don't pay for friendly incompetence. And saying sorry doesn't work in five-star, you've just got to get it right. So, and how do you get it right? You do have that attention to detail. And the other thing you have to have is what I call a sufficiently inquiring mind. So when things go wrong, and a classic example of that was just the other day, we had a guest that complained that the smoke alarm went off in their room. And so when we went up and had a look at the smoke alarm, the batteries had expired. Now, the easy thing to do would be to change the batteries and fix the problem, but if you have a sufficiently inquiring mind, you would say, well, let's go and check all the batteries to see when we put the others in, so that we don't now have the start of many smoke alarm batteries starting to go offline and the guests being inconvenienced, because you have to be ahead of the game. You don't become a reactive, you become proactive in how you go about making sure that attention to detail is in place. And that's really something that I got taught at the Regent, and very much, again, driven home when I worked for Four Seasons Hotels.
Now, a lot of hotels have looked at the Regent's success and copied their model and been very successful in doing so. In the global hotel sector, competition has dramatically increased over the last 10, 15 years. So if we jump forward to today's world, what do you think makes a great hotel?
The people that work in it, Simon. It's pretty simple. You know, the bricks and mortar are getting closer and closer. As far as what's being offered physically to hotels, you know, we all have pretty much the same, whether they're 3, 4 or 5-star hotels these days. You know, physically, they're pretty similar, although room sizes are varying very much today. But to me, the significant difference, particularly in the upper upscale area, is in the people that work in the property. Because, you know, if you're coming to Sydney and you're deciding to stay in one of 10 hotels that are of a similar range, what makes them choose you? And then, as I say to the sales team, you know, we've got to close the deal with the operation, because it's far better to keep a customer than find a new one. We spend a lot of money on our marketing and our advertising, you know, trying to get people through the door in the first place. So the idea is you've got to keep them coming back. You've also got to stay relevant. You know, you've got to be up to speed with what's relevant in the market and what the customer wants. And, you know, today the customer tells you very quickly what they want, and they don't only tell you, they tell everybody else that's ready to listen. So you've got to have an attitude that says we are listening and we are doing something about it, because if you don't, it'll just steamroll, and one customer will lead to many more telling you what's wrong with your property. So very focused on making sure you're dealing with guests and all the feedback that they give you.
Over the next 5 years, a lot of our students will move into leadership roles. They'll be responsible for larger portfolios. They'll be responsible for leading people. Some of them already are moving into those roles, which is fantastic. Tell us about your first 6 months as a leader. What did that look like? Was it all glitz and glamour, or was it really hard work? And what were some of the key areas that you really had to focus on?
I guess the first time I considered myself a leader was when I was made the rooms division manager at the Four Seasons or the Regent Hotel, and I was put on the leadership committee. So that was a little bit difficult at the time, I remember, because everyone had been established on that leadership team. I was the new person in that role. You make mistakes, you try to over-impress initially, you try and make yourself sound better than what you really are, and that exposes you very quickly because your colleagues will soon see through that. So what I did learn from that was that you have to learn to manage the team around you as well as the people underneath you. And, you know, learn to manage your manager was the thing that I was taught very early in my career. You look at the person above and you always manage up, you don't manage down. Because if you have those skills of looking up, you're not focused on, you know, passing the wrong information down. You're only focused on getting it right going forward. And those are the sort of things that I sort of took with me. You are going to hit hurdles in your leadership quest, particularly those first couple of times that you're put into those roles. The expectation on you to be able to deal with situations when they get a little bit out of hand, or what they call a crisis, and how calm you remain in those situations is always an important way to show whether you've got those qualities under stress, I guess. And, you know, our industry, I always try and say keep it simple, because it is pretty simple. We often overcomplicate it, and you know, take yourself seriously, but don't take your job seriously. Don't take yourself too seriously is always the mantra that we say at the hotel, because you've got to have a bit of fun at work as well. So, you know, balancing it all out, not becoming too serious as a leader when you first get into that role, understanding the people you're leading with and how they work, and the leader above you is probably the critical key points to starting off in a leadership role.
Okay. You're now the regional manager of the Radisson brand, the general manager of the Radisson Plaza Sydney, and the chairman of the Accommodation Board for Tourism Accommodation Australia. What's a day in the life of Peter Tudehope involve?
Wow.
Given all those portfolios.
Yeah. Yeah, look, it's pretty busy, I've got to say. You know, you have to have a bit of a structure around how you manage all those things. So you set up regular times that you meet with department heads and with the general managers of the other properties. You then sort of manage your diary in relation to the tourism accommodation portfolio of issues that come up as well. So to my mind, it's really a diary management process. I probably start work at 7 o'clock in the morning. I normally finish about 7 of an evening. And I try and spend as much time being in my hotel as well, because you don't want to be sort of responsible for a hotel and then be doing everybody else's business except your own. Because I can assure you, take the eye off the ball in the marketplace that gets a little bit competitive, you get left behind very quickly today.
Looking at your previous background, you have involved yourselves in a lot of external committees and organisations and so on. How important is it for a hotel general manager not only to focus on the day-to-day operation of the hotel, but to become involved in other aspects of the destination management and so on?
Yeah, I think it's critical, Simon. I think you've got to have a profile in the industry. It's really important. Certainly, I guess one of the drivers when you work for a small chain like mine, which doesn't have a big footprint in a country like Australia, you've got to work a bit harder than the properties that, you know, where there's 200 of them, etc., etc. But it's all about network, because network gives you knowledge, it gives you an understanding of what's going on, it gives you market intelligence, and it gives you an awareness of the latest trends that are going on. And if you're just sitting in your hotel completely oblivious to what's happening, again, you're going to be left behind. And that's why it is important to be out there and attending tourism events, whatever's been put on offer. You can't go to all of them, unfortunately, because you'd never be at the hotel. There's so many of them. You've got to pick and choose the right ones.
I remember I worked with a general manager, Karen Wares, who was the general manager of the Radisson Kestrel over in Manly. Karen was also very much involved in the Manly Chamber of Commerce. And one day I asked her, why was she involved and why was this important? And she had a very simple reply to me, and she said, my hotel is only going to be as successful as the destination it's in. As a general manager, I have the influence as to how this destination is managed and operated. So it's critical for me to be involved in these organisations for the overall success of the hotel. And I thought that was a very, very wise piece of advice.
Totally agree. It is so true. You've got to, we are part of a big tourism network. You've got tourism, you've got Destination New South Wales, you've got Business Events Sydney, you've got the ICC. Everybody's driving business in, and if you're not part of the planning of that and understanding what the next challenges are that the ICC or the airport's facing, it's going to affect you as a business. So you've got to be bigger than just your portfolio of hotel or hotels. You've got to be tourism big in your mindset.
I spent 5 very happy years with the Radisson. They were very good to me. I had the opportunity to work overseas in Bangkok and also in Kathmandu and also in Tahiti. So it was 5 very busy years. But since I was with the Radisson, there has been a lot of changes. Can you tell us a little bit about the Radisson brand today?
Sure. So Radisson Hotels used to be known as Carlson Hotels, and in 2016, Carlson Hotels was sold to a company called HNA in China. So it was a family-owned business, private, out of the United States. It had 1,300 hotels worldwide at that stage. Obviously small footprint in Australia, but in North America, South America and Europe, quite a large footprint. It composed of brands of the Radisson Blue, the Radisson, Radisson Red, Park Plaza and Park Inn by Radisson are the core brands. It only has 7. It's probably easier to manage 7 than 30 or 40 brands that many of our competitor management companies run. Last year, HNA sold our Radisson Hotel to a company called Xinjiang out of Shanghai. Now, Xinjiang is a big hospitality company in China, has a lot of local brands, but automatically it put us, by Xinjiang buying Radisson, as the 3rd biggest hotel management company in the world, because you add our 1,400 hotels to their 5,000 hotels, and all of a sudden we have 6,500 hotels worldwide. Now, they're not all called Radissons, but the management company owners are responsible for 6,500 hotels worldwide. So it's a different dynamic. In Europe, it's a publicly listed company called Residor. Xinjiang has now purchased 94% of that company, so when they purchase the last 6%, they'll make that private as well, and they'll have the complete network across the globe. So it's exciting times, Simon, for us, because we're yet to really understand what the influence of Xinjiang will be to Radisson, but from a privately owned company being run out of Minneapolis in the States to 6,500 room strong hotel company run out of Shanghai, the world's your oyster.
Which I think leads me into the next question very nicely. Why should our graduates consider a career with Radisson?
Good question. I don't know whether one should ever sort of start saying career with Radisson or career with anyone. A student should consider a career in hospitality, and that career can take you anywhere, in my opinion. And you don't want to get too locked in to one particular company, because I think one of the things, although all management companies tend to do similar things, they do it slightly differently. But the learning you can get from moving a little bit between some of these management companies is really important. Radisson has its set of values which are really important to it, and there's great opportunities within Radisson, obviously with 6,500 hotels. It's huge, but again, I wouldn't sort of say just target Radisson and that's all you would do. My career, I've worked for 4 management companies, and the value I've got from the other 3 has really held me in good stead for what I've done in Radisson. So, Intercontinental Hotels, Four Seasons and Regent all gave me different strengths, which I now bring into the Radisson experience. So, I should be perhaps saying go work for Radisson. You're probably thinking, why isn't he? But I'm not. I'm saying is that if I was a student, I'd be very open-minded about opportunities. And you know, today opportunities are coming at us quick and fast. We've got to understand that the business is evolving very quickly. You've got to persevere as a student. It's not going to be handed to you, but if you persevere, you'll get where you want to in our industry for sure.
How important as a career is it to find a brand or a hotel that fits your personality?
It's good because you'll get a comfort zone from that, but it's probably pretty hard to do, you know, and it can slow you down a little bit, to be honest, because if you get too comfortable because you like what it is, then you're probably going to let one or two opportunities slip by because you like the feel and the space. So in my mind, it's nice to have it at some stage in your career when you land one of those properties that fits your personality, but there's going to be a hell of a lot of properties you work in that won't, and you've got to make it work for you. And that's taking ownership of your own career is a critical part of what you have to do. Every one of us has to understand that nobody else owns their career except the person that has it. And you know, I say to people, your manager is not owning your career. No one owns it except you, and if you take responsibility for it, you'll get where you want to go. So, yeah.
As a senior leader in a hotel, no doubt you have a lot of department heads, assistant GMs, director of operations, rooms division managers and so on. So middle management positions reporting to you. In your opinion, what makes an effective department head or middle manager?
Experience. The understanding of going from a star player to a coach. It's a pretty simple analogy when you put it in sporting terms, because often if you look at football teams or any sort of team sports, the star players don't always make the best coaches, but often some of those players that make up the numbers in a team that have worked hard to make the team successful, when they become the coach, actually excel. And so you've got to understand that you've got to start to get results through other people. So it's not about you anymore when you're a department head, it's about the people that work for you. And if you can take that in and look to try and make them successful, your own success comes automatically. And you see some department heads not understanding that initially. They think that they have to be successful, they have to have all the answers. They want you to give the report to them so that they can go present it as their report and all that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, they're not being successful themselves. And it's only when they realise that if I work through my team for success, I will be successful myself. That's where they start to come to the...
So in an interview, if you're interviewing for a prospective department head or similar role, what qualities do you actually look for? So what do you try and tease out in the interview?
Well, first of all, I try and tease out their real understanding of the portfolio that they're responsible for. So, you know, they've got to have that basic knowledge. There's no point sitting in front of me if you've never really understood the department that you're asking to lead. So once you've established they've got the knowledge and the thing, you've got to work out whether they've got the skills, the people skills to manage other people. So you try and tease out the difficulties that they have. You try and give them opportunity to relate to you some of the successes they've had with managing people, and then to talk about some of the difficulties they've had with managing people, to understand how they deal with that. And you know, you can soon pick up whether they're really knowing how to work with a team of people. And then you sort of talk about how they relate to other departments, and you know, when they go to work, do they just purely focus in their own area, or do they see the bigger picture of the business that we're in? And big picture is really the hardest thing to teach a department head, because they've normally come up through that discipline, that's their expertise, and you say it's no longer just about that, but it's about that. Because you know, a hotel is like a pizza. You know, everyone knows what a pizza is, so you know, if you divide it up and each slice of a pizza is a different department. But you know, you take one of the pieces of pizza away, then the pizza is not a whole anymore. And you know, I often talk to frontline employees about how important they are as part of this pizza, because if a guest comes to a hotel, for instance, and when they first arrive, the first part of the pizza is that arrival experience, and if that's a good experience, then that slice of the pizza tastes okay. If the second part of the experience is the check-in, and if that's okay, the second part tastes okay. The third part normally is the guest room, and if they go up to the guest room and that's no good, then that slice of the pizza's no good. And if one slice of a pizza's no good, the whole pizza's no good. So
it's like the dominoes effect, isn't it? Where it just keeps just falling over.
You got it. You got it. So that's really the essence of it. So, you know, understanding the big picture and how we have to interrelate to be successful as a hotel.
I want to flesh out something that you said a couple of minutes ago about the big picture. We live in a globally connected world. We have so many more areas that we can access information, not only about what's happening in our hotel, but what's happening in the world around us. So literally each day we're bombarded with information. But part of leadership is also being strategic. How important is it for a hotel mid-manager or a senior hotel leader not only to have an understanding of what's happening in the microcosm of the hotel, but to have an understanding of what's actually happening around the hotel and where those opportunities and threats may be. So in other words, staying engaged with current affairs, with the media on a regular basis and critically analysing that information.
Oh, Simon, that's the game today. You know, that is the game. You've got to be that far ahead in relation to what's going on. You know, we're already talking about the first quarter of next year. We're not, you know, the rest of this year has got to happen, but it's what are we doing in the first quarter of next year? What are some of the circumstances going to affect the first 3 months of 2020? Because if we stay just focusing on now and thinking that's all that matters now, then the opportunities that are out there for the next part of the year are going to go by very, very quickly. So you've got to get your leadership team and you've got to yourself be constantly talking about down the track. You've got to understand the innovation that's going on, the IT that's happening in your hotels and what's going out there in the marketplace. You're right about being bombarded, but you know, you can't read every piece of information that's being said to you. You can be trapped at your desk just opening emails all day if you want to be, because they send you so much stuff and there's so many training courses you can go to, there's so many latest technology things that are coming out. So you've got to balance it. You've got to be able to sort of cut through a little bit to understand, well, what's really relevant to me and what's not. And you soon learn as you grow as a leader and you understand the meetings or the events that are held that bring value to your business. And that comes with a little bit of trial and error, unfortunately, because you'll attend one or two that are absolutely, you think, what am I doing here? This is really giving me no benefit at all. But once you understand that this one, you know, this particular course or this particular seminar is really adding value, that's when you start to understand how to pick and choose what to attend going forward. So very, very important. We don't work in the now, we work in the future, because the now's too late.
And of course the future is not only about the hotel itself, it's about what's happening around the hotel, and sometimes the importance of engaging with various different news websites, media, organisations, training courses is just fundamental to leadership in hotels, really.
Absolutely. You know, we've got an election coming up, a federal election now. You know, what if we have a change of government federally? What's the industrial relations landscape going to look like? Now we can sit there and just say, let's wait and see, or we can be proactively sort of saying to ourselves, well, look, if the industrial landscape changes, what are we going to do to change it? So we're already meeting about that sort of thing, because you've got to be ready to go rather than sort of saying, wow, now we've got to try and sort this out, because often you're doing it under pressure and you're making poor decisions. So you're right, you're always looking at what events are happening that are major to the city or what's happening in governments or what's happening in associations, to really understand how you stay ahead of the game.
A lot of organisations beyond just hospitality, and even some hospitality organisations, are really approaching workplace culture, dress regulations and so on quite differently. The Commonwealth Bank, I walk past the Commonwealth Bank offices every day on the way to work, and their dress code has changed dramatically, where it's business casual. And I think I read recently that Goldman Sachs is also planning now for all of their company for, you know, dress casually, you know, dress to suit whatever you're doing, etc., etc. How important in our industry, in the hotel sector, is personal presentation and personal branding and developing your own personal brand?
Well, brand is key. We all know that. You know, people talk about brand all the time, and the success of brands and how that brand will last always. And brands evolve. Your own personal brand evolves, as does the brand of the companies you work with. You've got to be able to adjust to the marketplace to a certain degree. You've got to be aware of what people want. You can't be a brand that nobody wants, because you'll have no business. So there is an evolution that always happens in branding. If you're a strong brand, you can still go through being successful and changing subtly. I think where it comes a little bit unstuck was when a brand just changes so dramatically overnight that people don't even realise that it was the old brand. Your own personal brand, well, what is your personal brand? Is it you're talking about your own set of values? That is key. You've got to have a set of values always that you take with you in business and in leadership, because as a leader, people are always looking at you. They're looking at the way you deal with situations, and your value system is often driving your decision making. And if you start to change your value systems around a little bit, then your decision making starts becoming consistent, and then people start to wonder what's happening. So, your own personal brand, probably changes subtly, but it doesn't. You've got to be very conscious that you're changing that brand as well.
I want to change the conversation slightly, and again, use your expertise as the regional manager for Radisson and talk a little bit about regional change and disruption in the Asia Pacific area. What do you see is currently happening in relation to key hospitality trends, not only in Australia, but in Asia Pacific at the moment?
Yeah, one of the great things about, one of the great trends that's coming back is food and beverage in hotels. What we saw happen, I guess, in the 90s and the early 2000s is where food and beverage was a very major part of hotels. It dissipated and went out of hotels, and it sort of only remained, particularly in Asia, in the hotels as the place where you would go, whereas in places like Sydney and Melbourne and the rest, you saw a hotel as where you stayed to sleep, and you would use food and beverage out of convenience, not as a destination. Destination dining is now going back into hotels, and our reputation around that trend is starting to grow again. And I think that's a really important aspect, because hotels need that, I guess the artistry of food and beverage. They need the innovation of food and beverage, because you can only do so much in the room product. It's food and beverage is where all the innovation really occurs. And you're seeing the way hotels are being redesigned now to try and make living spaces and common areas far more available to people, and communal spaces. They're shrinking rooms at the same time, so it's a little bit of a put more into the public space and put less into the room, and seeing how that works. Lifestyle brands are being developed today, which is a trend that sort of is gaining momentum. You worry about that sort of trend, whether it'll run out of steam eventually, and you'll see them today and gone tomorrow. There are an enormous number of brands that are out there in the marketplace, and the punter is actually confused today. They don't know what's what in the zoo anymore, because every second day there's a new brand, and they've got no real understanding of it. So it's becoming quite difficult, and it's an advantage to the traditional brands, because they go back to those because they know what they are, whereas these new ones pop up and they're sort of a little bit unknown until they start establishing themselves. So a lot of trend there, a lot of IT going into Asia as well, into technology and how we're setting rooms up, and the guest's ability to interact or not interact in a hotel, depending on how much they want to get involved or don't get involved. The reality is we're finding that the industry is still hospitality. Yep. And people still want people. You can put all the machines you like there, but they still want to interact with people. And I'm amazed today, Simon, how many people will make a booking through whatever website and whatever, then ring just to confirm that we've got the booking. You think, really? But that's what it is,
So you were talking about technology. What do you think are some of the key technology drivers or trends that we're seeing at the moment?
Well, I think it's around speed of check-in. It's about reducing people's waiting time for anything. So, you know, the ability to self-check-in, not to have to give them a key, to be able to use an app on their phone to access their room. That sort of technology is starting to evolve. The control of the room by voice, you know, turn the lights on, lower the air conditioning, that technology is starting to come in. And of course, the entertainment system has completely changed. You know, once upon a time, the entertainment system used to be the thing that was quite different from what you had at home. Now, you've got far more at home than you'll ever have at a hotel. So, you know, how do you evolve that? So you don't try and compete, you just give them, the guests, the ability to access whatever they want from their devices by your telephone system, TV system. So, you know, that's the sort of thing that's happening. And then in the food and beverage side, I guess it's more about responsible business activities that we're working on there. We're trying to take plastic out of a lot of the environments, and we're trying to make those areas a little bit more green and a bit more environmentally friendly. And you know, that innovation is what we're looking for in that space.
I was recently in Cambodia, and I was on the coastline, and what absolutely horrified me was the amount of plastic that had washed up right along the coastline. And it really got me thinking, from our particular industry, are we as an industry doing enough to reduce plastics?
I think we're starting to get there, Simon. I think we've got a long way to go, you know. Again, because we're catering to third parties, you're trying to work out what does our guest or our customer want. And the customer is now almost demanding that we start to change, which is fantastic. You know, once upon a time, you would put jugs of water in a meeting room or a function room and no one would touch them because, you know, that was tap water. And we had that big trend of, unless it was in a bottle and, you know, you couldn't drink it. Now, you try and put a bottle of water in a function room and they get upset because they want a jug of tap water in the function room instead. So we're being educated a little bit by the guest, and certainly today when you're doing business, particularly in corporate hotels like mine, and you're going in for what we call an RFP process to try and get them to give their room nights to you, a lot of what they want to know about is what you're doing environmentally and what your responsible business activities are, because they have to align with theirs if they're going to give you business. And that's becoming a very powerful tool now in how they're making hotels sort of fall in line if they're serious about getting business from different organisations.
So there might even be the opportunity, and perhaps our future leaders sitting in the room might consider this, to consider also having your hotel as a B Corp, which seem to be growing more and more around the worldwide organisations, to become not only you know, what they're actually doing on a day-to-day basis, but also a very effective B Corp organisation where their social and environmental practices are recognised and also accredited for the work they're actually doing in that particular space.
Yeah, that's where we're heading. You know, certainly a lot of the awards now, you know, TAA, which I'm involved with, you know, at our awards night, we are probably putting more and more awards out there for people's environmental policies, for people's, you know, workplace environments. So, you know, we're recognising those more and more because we see how important that is, you know, because the workplace has got to work not just for the guests, it's got to work for the people working there as well. And, you know, you want people to come to work that are like-minded and think that what you're doing is socially responsible, because if you came to work every day and you thought no one's actually trying to do anything to make things better, then it'd be pretty disheartening. So, you know, we are moving in the right direction in those. And I think, you know, governments are sort of looking at hotels now to see if they can improve some of their practices in relation to, you know, water consumption, energy consumption, and they're incentivising hotels to try and reduce the amount of footprint they have, that they're putting off in, and you know, it's a slow process, but it is starting to come to the surface, which is good.
Do you think it's important for a future hotel leader not only to be passionate and heavily invested in hotel management, but also to be able to communicate a cause that they're personally interested in, that might be a social and environmental cause beyond the hotel itself?
Yeah, because you're a leader in everything. when you're a leader. You know, you're leading the hotel or you're leading the business in how it's operating and how it's performing and how it's competing and all that sort of thing. And you're leading it in its social responsibility. Every which way you turn, people are watching you because your influence, you don't often realise how far it stretches as you get further up the chain. And people are hanging on certain things you say, and if you say them, that almost becomes the way they want to going forward. So you have to be very mindful that anything that you're putting your name to, a lot of people are going to follow you on that, you know, because that's what they're looking for in their leader.
We haven't touched really on, we've spoken about hotels, but we haven't really spoken about guest preferences, especially international guests that we look after in Australia, but generally guest preferences throughout Asia Pacific. How have you seen those guest preferences change over the last few years, if at all?
Well, I'm sure, you know, at one stage, the demographics, and, you know, we spend a lot of time looking at arrival patterns from different destinations in the world. You know, obviously China is a huge market, visitors market into Australia, and, you know, a lot of hotels went through that China Ready programs that were being rolled out. And again, the way they're doing business has changed from the way they travel in groups to FIT travel now, so they're travelling as individuals, and as a result you don't keep doing the same things that you were taught how to deal with the group. You have to sort of manage it into a slightly more refined space for an individual travel. Look, there are so many different nationalities that are coming through, and different needs and different markets and different age group demographics. A hotel has to try and be all things to all people. And that is always the challenge. And what you have to have is the basics right and consistently right, so that when you are trying to do the little things that are slightly different, at least the fundamentals continue to work for you.
It's a little bit like McDonald's, I suppose. McDonald's, no matter what they try and tell us, their core product is still burgers and fries. A hotel's core product, regardless of on how you reshape it, how you market it, is still a place to sleep. It's still accommodation.
That's what we provide, a place to sleep.
So getting those basics right is critical.
Correct.
You're in front of our future leaders at the moment of the hotel sector. As a highly respected hotelier and leader yourself, what 3 pieces of advice could you offer their own leadership development journey?
Whew. I should have read the questions. 3 pieces of advice I could offer you. You've got to work hard. You know, you can't think you're going to get there unless you really put the effort in. That's the thing. As a leader, the thing I always say, you've got to be fair, you've got to be firm, and you've got to be friendly. And if you can keep those 3 F's in place all through your career, you'll be successful. As a leader, you're the coach. You've got to be conscious that people are always looking at you, and you've got to be also conscious of the fact that what you say, people will react to. Your word stretches further than you ever realise. So if you can do that, and then you've got to be agile. You've got to be ready to move, and you will hit roadblocks in your career. There's absolutely no 2 ways about it. You'll hit disappointments. You'll have decisions you have to make to balance your work life. That they're going to be difficult at times as your career is growing, but never regret a decision, you know, because one door closes, another one will open if you've got the quality of what people are looking for. And that's probably pretty much what I would be advising our future leaders to do. Work hard, stay focused on what you're doing, be consistent about how you operate, and be ready to be flexible when you need to be.
Very good advice. Thank you, Peter. I'd like to use some time now to throw it open to our audience, to our students, who I know want to ask you some questions. So let's start with our first question, and please again wait till you've got the microphone, and then we'll and please ask Peter your question. And if you could introduce yourself also, that would be wonderful.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tudehope. It was great listening to you.
Thank you.
But I had a question, like, how do you manage 3 roles? How do you manage the stress of the overlapping tasks associated with the 3 roles? And how do you keep yourself composed during times when it's hard or tough and times of distress? How do you manage it all together and keep moving forward? How do you stay consistent during those times? I guess that's one of the hardest things for us.
So how do you keep motivated?
Well, we all are motivated, but it's just having to deal with, roadblocks, I would say, and keep the stress under control. How do you do it?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I've got a very simple, I said it already, take your job seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. I remember this story that I tell to new managers, and I say to them, I was a duty manager at the Intercontinental Hotel in 1987, and I arrived at work one morning, and there was a car accident, and these two cars had an accident, and there were two a Mercedes and a Jaguar or something, and I had to go and tell the guests we'd damaged their cars, and they started yelling at me and saying, they want compensation, etc. And then I went upstairs, and this lady was waiting for me in the lobby, and our laundry had shrunk her ball gown into a mini skirt, and it was a $3,000 ball gown that we'd shrunk into a mini skirt, and she was beside herself, and so I had to deal with that. So, and then I got to 3 o'clock, it was time for me to go home, and 50 rooms arrived in the hotel, and we were full. And I still remember the date today. It was the 11th of October, and we'd put them in the system for the 10th of November. So these 50 rooms were standing in the lobby. I didn't have a room in the hotel to give them. And I had to sort this out. I put them all over Sydney and got it all sorted out. I remember going home that night to my father, and I said to Dad, he said, son, talking about stress and whatnot, and he said to me, had a tough day. I said, yeah, but you don't want to know about it. He said, no. So I told him the story, and I said to him, this is what happened. And he listened very patiently, and then he turned to me and he said, do you want to hear about my day? And I said, no, I don't want to hear about your day. You can't have a worse day than me. He was a doctor. So he told me about, he got called out at 4:30 because someone got hit by a train, and their head was over there and their body was over there, and he had to go to the hospital, and a lady had miscarriage, was having triplets, and he said, son, if the worst thing that ever happens to someone in their life is their dress is ruined, they've had a fabulous life. He said, take your job seriously, but don't take yourself so seriously. That is how I deal with it today.
Great, thank you. Another question.
Good afternoon, my name is Jocelyn, and I want to ask, we know everyone that the motivation is really important in our journey, but there's days that we live really bad experience. How you manage yourself to pass through everything and keep going forward, and also keep climbing everything as much as you can for be able to achieve the goals that you are already have in your mind? How do you manage? Because I think everyone has passed really bad experience that make them think the worst part about their journey, and actually make you feel sad or overstressed that why I pick hospitality for study, or what am I doing here? Yeah.
I sort of get your question. That's why I think it's so important when you're in your work environments and you're having those periods of time when things aren't going. These are all learning experiences. Every time you've come out of an experience where you're feeling stressed or you didn't like what's happened, you've got to say to yourself, when I'm a manager, I've got to make sure I don't ever put somebody in that situation. I've learned from that today, and that's why if you can go around and understand something positive every day and look for something positive in work every day, just one thing, it just makes a big difference to your whole outlook at work. But if you're going to work and you're only looking for the negative, you'll find it every time, trust me, because that's, we're dealing in an environment where people are dealing with people and things go wrong all the time. But there are so many positive things that come out of it. And this is a fantastic industry. I've seen the world in this industry. I've worked in countries all over the world. I've worked with so many different cultures. I've built hotels in Bangladesh. I've opened hotels in China. I've opened front office systems in the Philippines and in Indonesia. I've travelled the world. And you know, you see the problems and the stresses that each culture has and each environment has, but at the end of the day, there's so many positive things that are coming out of it as well. And, you know, the success stories, the most motivating thing that you can have as a leader is watching the success of other people, because it's a reflection of you anyway.
Peter, I have a question from another one of our campuses.
Oh, fantastic.
And they talk about, I'm rephrasing the question on their behalf, they talk about millennials in the workplace, especially in our sector. And they mention that now more and more hoteliers are millennials and are interested in remaining and having a career within the hotel sector. But they're curious to know what hotels are doing to adapt their culture to millennial preferences.
Yeah, look, you know, the reality is that a lot of hotels have people working. In my hotel, the youngest person is 17 and the oldest person is 75. So you have a range of age groups that are working in your hotel. I don't particularly think you try and cater to a particular group or age group of people. It's like anything. You run a business where people, because people, whether they're 20 or 40 or 60, they want an environment where they are appreciated for what they do, they're rewarded for what they do, and they feel as though they're valued. And if you can create that environment, it doesn't really matter. Now, millennials are certainly the predominant force, and a lot of you here are all millennials, and you're going to be managers in the future, managing whatever we call the next generation. And you know, they're going to have their certain needs that you're looking for. But obviously the workplace, and particularly the industrial relations environment and the human resources environment in hotels, has changed a lot. And there's a more balancing of making sure that the workplace environment and your work-life balance are correct. I remember when I first joined the Intercontinental Hotel back in 1985, and I was called into the general manager's office, and he said to me, he said, "This is a place of work. You do not socialise here. You socialise outside the hotel." Now, can you imagine saying that at a hotel today? It just wouldn't work, you know. But that was back in those days. You worked at work and you played outside, whereas now we understand that it is a social environment as well as a work environment. So you have to balance, but it's a social environment as well as a work environment for all age groups, not just millennials.
Which leads nicely into the second part of their question, which talks about workplace culture. And they mentioned that we all know about Google and their workplace culture and so on, but what makes a great hotel culture?
The fish stinks from the head first, okay? So the person that sets the culture is the leader. And the leader then normally brings around them like-minded people that will then continue to have that culture in place. But it's not that hard to put a culture that people like to work into place. And it's about being firm, friendly, and fair. Because if you create those three things, that's the culture people feel most comfortable in, no matter how old they are, no matter where they work.
Great answer. Audience.
Afternoon. My name is Justin. I just want to ask, what is the importance of e-commerce to your hotel? What relationship does your hotel or your brand hold with OTAs in today's market? And how does this affect your business in the recent years?
Yeah, Justin, good question. You know, the distribution platforms that we now drive our business off, which are predominantly OTAs, are critical to the lifeline of hotels. You know, 33% of our business comes via distribution, whereas in the old days that mix was very, very different. You know, we're now competing head-to-head with Airbnb for a lot of the business and short stay platforms, which make it difficult for us. We're working hard to try and compete on those grounds, but you know, the digital marketing space is also critical. One of the worries you have is where do you place your digital marketing dollars, because there's a lot of people out there trying to grab them, and how do you get the best bang for your buck is really what it's all about. Because you know, the return on investment is really what a lot of us are finding hard to measure in the digital space at the moment, because there's a lot of numbers that are being thrown at you that have no relevance to whether you're performing or not. So marketing has become a specialised area. Probably one of the most important department head roles today is your revenue department. Sales and marketing is changing dramatically as we speak. The traditional sales and marketing model is now starting to morph into other things, and the marketing is especially in its own. The person that used to be a director of sales and marketing, most organisations now saying director of sales, director of marketing, because marketing is so specialised. And if we don't get ourselves digitally set up correctly, and that includes, you know, attention to detail around our photography, around the back of engine setups, to ensure that every piece of information is absolutely 100% correct, because you get it wrong a little bit, it makes a huge difference to a guest stay. So we work pretty hard on that. So absolutely critical, and would strongly recommend that as a leader and a general manager in your future, you stay very focused around revenue management, because that's the driver of your business today. And there will be very few market segments that aren't on a platform in the next 2 years. They're all morphing. In actual fact, the traditional market segments of hotels are being changed as we speak. We no longer measure them along the lines of corporate, airline crew, ad hoc groups. We now put them under website platforms like OTAs, TripAdvisor bookings. They almost go under the name of Expedia, Booking.com, etc., etc. So big change happening in that space, and got to be very relevant in that space.
I have another online question. This student is interested to know a little bit more about your points around food and beverage and innovation that we spoke about earlier on. And I know down at Radisson that you've got the Bentley Boys in, and that has been very, very effective and successful for Radisson. But what are some of the other innovations that you see are currently occurring or are important for food and beverage?
Well, certainly there's, again, it's around lifestyle foods that people are looking for today. You know, there's a whole market growing around healthy, and certainly a lot of hotels are really understanding the importance of providing healthy options and healthy menus. You know, a chef today has got to be an absolute mind reader, because there are, you know, you get an order. I think there's an ad on television you can see occasionally where someone wants to order a coffee without this, and this, and by the time they finish the order, you think, well, how do you make this thing? You know, so the innovation is about how do we keep delivering as people change their needs. So how people are looking at their dietary requirements today, making what they want as a traditional meal rather than a special meal. That's where the innovation is happening, and certainly around health. Health and wellbeing is a big part of what we're trying to do today.
One more question from the audience, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Francisca. As you know, like everyone makes mistake, and decision is basically like a trial and error. What is the mistake that basically most leaders makes in the organization? Do you have any advice for us, as probably like we will face it, on that kind of mistake, on how do we prevent it? Thank you.
Francisca, I guess the mistake that most leaders make when they first become leaders is not understanding how important it is to get results through other people. And they try and think that they are still the people that have to impress. And they go about trying to use the knowledge and the skills of other people to their own advantage, instead of letting those people's skills and knowledge be to their advantage and promoting it through them rather than themselves. So don't ever take somebody else's work and use it as your own. That's really the message, and it's tempting at times. You'll send somebody and you'll say, I need you to update this report or give me some feedback on this, and they flick it through to you and you read, you think, oh, that's really good. I'll send that on, take their name off it, and off it goes, and all of a sudden you're getting all the accolades. Very short-term fame, okay? It won't last you very long at all.
Thank you very much for being with us today. I especially like to thank our students at our Town Hall campus who are here with us today, our students at our Melbourne campus and our Lura campus, and our students who have joined us from our campuses in Asia. I'd especially like to thank Mr. Peter Tudehope for your time today.
Thank you.
After all these years, it's been wonderful catching up with you again and a
Absolutely.
chat, and I do hope you'll come back and talk to our students again.
If you'll have me back, I'll be happy.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this term's Leadership Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us.